Hello everyone, hope you're all having a fantastic day and welcome to the Courage or Frights, a channel where we talk about movies and games, especially those dealing with the horror genre. And today we're going to be talking about the third and final film in the Netflix horror trilogy Fear Street. Fear Street Part 3, 1666, is a horror slasher film directed by Lee Yaniak and stars many of the same actors as Part 1 and 2, including Kiana Madeira, Benjamin Flores Jr., Olivia Scott Welch, Jillian Jacobs, and Ashley Zuckerman. Part 3 picks up where the previous part left off, with Dina reuniting the severed hand of Sarah Fier with the rest of her body in the hopes that this will appease her spirit and break the curse on Shadyside. Instead, it causes Dina to see a vision of Sarah's life in 1666, which is the setting for the first half of the film. In this portion, we see the earliest days of the community, back when Shadyside and Sunnyvale were both part of a settlement known as Union, and we learn that the events as we thought we knew them were actually quite different. Without giving too much away, it turns out that the real culprit was not Sarah Fier at all, as she was falsely accused and executed for practicing witchcraft. Instead, we discover that the actual perpetrator escaped unharmed, and it is his descendants that keep the curse alive to this very day. By making a pact with multiple demons, he ensures the prosperity of his family, but in order to continue this agreement, each generation must perform a ritual and name another soul for the demons to take, who, of course, will become the next killer of Shadyside. As a result, Shadyside continues to be the murder capital of America, while the portion of Union that later becomes Sunnyvale continues to prosper. After seeing the true events unfold from Sarah's point of view, the film then shifts back to 1994, where the title changes back to Fear Street 1994 Part 2. Dina, after witnessing the historical events and learning who the true culprit is, develops a plan to use the killers against him. With the help of her brother Josh, C. Berman, and a character from Part 1, Martin, they hatch a plan to set a trap in the Shadyside Mall to capture the killers and then unleash them on the one controlling them by using Dina's blood, since they seem to only hunt based on smell. Of course, none of this goes entirely as planned, which leads to a pretty thrilling and effective final conflict in the mall. Strangely enough, I actually really enjoyed the 1994 Part 2 portion of this film quite a bit, and it was great to see characters we had followed in the previous two installments get a conclusion to their stories. Now to address the elephant in the room, at least for me, which is the portrayal of the 1666 segment of this film. As someone with a pretty extensive history background, I was looking forward to this film to see how it would handle the 17th century setting, and well, it could have been better. As the first two parts drew heavily from the films of the same era, I feel like the 1666 setting was trying to be like the 2015 film The Witch, which was set in 1630s New England, which is fine. But there's a small problem with the Fear Street depiction. Fear Street is set in Ohio. And why is that a problem, you might ask? After all, Ohio today isn't all that far removed from New England, right? Well, let me explain.
Tell me about Ohio.
In the 17th century, the area known today as Ohio was almost entirely populated by various indigenous Native American tribes, and Europeans had only just started exploring the region. In 1666, the region had mostly been depopulated by the frequent wars and epidemics that inflicted the area at the time and was primarily used as a hunting ground by the Iroquois nation. At the time of this story, the region had recently been incorporated into New France, but was still in the early stages of exploration, so the only non-native people one would likely encounter in Ohio at the time would have been a handful of Dutch traders and some French explorers. So it's doubtful you'd have a Puritan town in that area at the time depicted, which is a problem I knew would happen in Part 1 when they mentioned the state they were in, but was curious to see how they addressed it. Well, they didn't. Also, there is not a single Native American character depicted in the 1666 portion, which is odd, as they would have comprised nearly the entirety of the small population of Ohio at the time. There's also the problem of the accents. If you want to have a general idea of what people of the period would have sounded like, I would recommend watching The Witch, although be warned, it might be a bit difficult to understand for some, as the English of that period was pretty different from what is spoken today. While I don't expect Fear Street to be on the same level of authenticity as a film like The Witch, the creators of this film seem to have made the bold decision to instead go with a roughly early 20th century vaguely Irish accent for many of the characters, which is certainly an interesting choice to say the least. Without getting too in-depth into the socio-political climate of the 17th century, I'll just say that there are quite a few reasons why an English colony in native lands, in a nominally French territory entirely populated by Irish from the future, would maybe not be the best idea. Historical context and jokes aside, is Fear Street Part 3 a satisfying conclusion to the trilogy? Sort of. While it's far from the worst thing I've seen, it does come off as the weakest entry for me, personally, which is a shame because I really wanted to like this as much as the first two parts. It does have its moments, though. I liked some of the plot twists, and the concept of having actors play multiple roles was pretty cool. Gave the whole flashback to the 17th century section a sort of stage performance type of quality. Also, the final showdown in the Shadyside Mall has some cool elements, especially when they get the killers to fight one another, though their elaborate plot to get them to turn on their master was kind of ridiculous, especially when they could have just killed the guy in charge by ordinary means and ended the entire ordeal. Also, while the reveal of who the culprit actually is makes sense, it's also a little underwhelming in that if that truly were the one behind it, you'd think they'd ask for something more. Creating multiple magic serial killers that each go on murderous rampages seems to be quite a high price for the payoff one receives as a result. Some of the killers are quite interesting, and I wish we got some more backstory for them, although it has been reported that a spin-off is potentially in the works that could address that. Also, in the final battle, we get to see all of the same killers we saw at the end of Part 1 and 2 again, which means that these are probably all of them. But seeing as this curse has been inflicted on every generation since 1666, one would imagine there should be a lot more of them than what we see on the screen. Would I recommend Fear Street Part 3? Perhaps surprisingly, yes, I would, especially if you're invested in the story from Part 1 and 2 and wanted to see it through to its conclusion. However, I would recommend both of them over this entry, with Part 2 being my personal favorite of the trilogy. Overall, I liked these films for what they were and saw them as fun retro throwbacks, something akin to the TV movies of the week of the 70s to 90s, and would definitely check out any potential spin-offs or sequels that might be made in the future. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more horror movie reviews in the future. Also, if you saw the Fear Street films, tell me your thoughts about them in the comments below. I'd love to know your opinion, and as always, thanks for watching.